hopefully we're all going to avoid the post-prandial lull. How was lunch? Good? Excellent. Okay, let's kick off into the next session, please. The next session tries to take us back onto the farm, and it features Steph Bullen and Shiona Berry as the dairy farmer in question, looking at essentially, it's not quite a case study, but just how it can be implemented on farm based on someone who's actually using it. If I can introduce both of the speakers for you. So Steph Bullen, over here to my right. I've got the privilege of working with Steph most days of the week. Steph's a veterinarian, originally from Geelong, off a beef property, but has spent most of her working life in apparently the good country of Gippsland. She worked as both a clinician for Mafra and then ended up working in field services for Murray Goulburn and then into Saputo. More recently, we've been fortunate, she's now the national lead for animal health fertility for Dairy Australia. So I'm lucky I get to work with her every day. And she's one of the architects and corrallers of the project that you've been exposed to, which is the Advancing Accelerating Heifer Genomic project that we've talked about today. Joining her is Shiona Berry, who's a dairy farmer from Gippsland, Glen Alvie. Shiona's on a 4th generation dairy farm, which is impressive just on its own accord. So the farm's been in their family for over 100 years. She has worked previously as a nutritionist as well. So she's interested in ruminant physiology. And she also has been a dairy board member since 2017. And she's also a person who's enthusiastic about getting young people interested in the dairy industry through the Cows Create Careers project, which runs on in schools. So without further ado, Steph, Shiona, welcome.
Where would you like to sit?
I don't care.
You can sit. I don't have COVID. We're good. Welcome, Shiona. So thanks everyone, probably just, this is my first chance to talk up on the stage today, and I just wanted to thank you all, both those of you that are online and those of you that are in the room for coming along to the day. Certainly can't take the credit for organising today, but as JP said early on, this has been a pretty amazing collaboration, this whole project and the day between industry and commercial players. But the most important people that are in the room and that stand to benefit from the project are farmers. And we heard from John this morning from all the way over the other side of the world. John's obviously really experienced and been doing a lot of genomic testing for a long time. But Michelle and I and the genomics team really wanted to hear from someone that was much earlier in their earlier in their journey of genomic testing, really to find out around a bit about what some of the challenges are, what are the things that we could be doing potentially as industry to make it easier, and what are the kind of tips and tricks that Shiona might want to share with other farmers that are potentially embarking on this journey. So thanks so much for coming. Shiona's in the middle of calving, so it's a bit of a big deal for her to be off farm today. So thanks very much to Caleb for letting you get off farm. Shiona, can you start by just telling us a little bit about your farm business?
Okay, so I probably need to correct it because the farm's been in my husband's family for 100 years, not mine. So, so Caleb and I milk at Glen Alvie, we milk around 800 cows. We split calving, so we calve generally the 1st of Feb and then the 1st of August for a 8 to 9 week period. We have flipped over, I suppose. We've been accused at different stages, and probably as a shock to all the people in this room, neither of us are hugely into genetics. Caleb always went down the full pasture, that was his love, and I was always focused on nutrition. So we've been guilty of just letting people at different stages just kind of help us with our genetic, picking our bulls, and we just trusted that everything went the right way. So probably back in around 2011-12, we looked at our herd and said, actually, these are going the wrong way. This is not where we want to be, and went down a path of actually focusing a bit more ourselves. So the cows had got too big. they weren't necessarily always getting pregnant. So we switched our bull selection back then to just focusing on stature, fertility, still keeping in mind traits of good legs, feet, because where we are, it's the hills. So the cows have got marching up and down hills all the time. The big cows just don't cope. And so that's the way we kind of went back then. And then at the same time sort of started our journey with sex semen. So we use a lot of sex semen now. We did start off just with the heifers, but now it's probably more my husband than mine. I don't enjoy it so much because I rear the calves, but it's pretty much probably 80-90% of the cows get a sex semen straw, and that's what we're doing. And then we use a balance of a little bit of conventional for cows we're not sure whether they're pregnant, and that's the path we've gone on up until Michelle got me going into genomically testing the heifers. So
awesome. I love that Shiona just... so the first, I emailed her some questions to consider, and she's just answered the first 4 that I had. So that's fantastic. Thanks, Shiona. One of my questions for you is sort of what's the ideal cow, what's the ideal herd? And I think you've sort of really described what wasn't working for you, but cows that sort of work well on that hilly country. How do you, have you got a really clear kind of goal in mind for where you want your herd to be in 5 or 10 years' time? And we heard from I Ching and John, that it's a long-term gain. Have you and Caleb got a clear vision in your mind as to where you want your herd to be in the next 10 years?
Probably, yeah. So we want an animal that can march up hills. So they're probably a bit more robust than your normal dairy type that we were always sort of led to believe was great. So we've got production in mind as well. So our cows probably do 8,500 to 9,000 litres. So that's definitely a focus. And yeah, we just want our cows pregnant, and we want them still all 4 legs on the ground, and we want to have a choice to cull a cow. We don't want to have a choice that we have to cull a cow because she's empty or she has mastitis. We want the cow to last, so that when we're bringing in heifers, that's what we're bringing in, and we're making a real decision on who to cull.
Yeah, okay, that's great. And I'm going to ask you a little bit more perhaps later on about how you sort of make those decisions in terms of your breeding and genetics. But in terms of genomics specifically, Shiona, when did you first hear about it, and did you pick it up straight away, or did it take you and Caleb a little while to make the decision to start testing, and what was the thing that eventually got you over the line?
So I probably heard about genomic testing quite a few years ago, but it was always deemed a bit of a cost. That's probably the biggest thing for us. And because neither Caleb nor I were really into genetics as per se, I know there's people in this room that can talk about the lines of dairy cattle that go back however many generations. We
heard that from John, didn't we?
I'm not going to do that. So because we weren't really into it, I just didn't ever really look down that line at all. And then you'd hear the cost associated with each test, and it does, when you're rearing the number of calves, you just add that bill up and you sort of think that's just too much. So what probably got us over the line, which is probably still a little bit unfair, Michelle asked us to go into her PhD study, which was sampling dead calves, so calves that died between day 0 and weaning. So we started on that, but because we were participating in that program, it opened up the door for us to test our live ones as well. And I thought, well, we may as well and just see, because one of the other reasons is because we've been rearing so many more heifers because they're sex semen, we have found a difference too. I don't know, there was the talk about using fertility in the talk just before lunch, the fertility bull. So our cows actually are getting pregnant really quite well now. But that's sort of 10 years of just selecting for fertility. But we've been selling a lot to export market. So we know that what we were doing to pick the ones for export market were not great, because we went through the stage of just the tail enders. That's what we culled. Then we went through the stage of we'll look at the mothers and see what their production is, whether we like their traits, all that sort of thing, and we'll get rid of their calves if they don't tick a box. But then when you look at the number of calves that are coming in a day and you realise that there's 5 calves on the ground and you can't work out which cow had which calf, that's not a feasible option either. So that was one of the other reasons we decided to start the genomically of the live calves, because we could then make a better decision on who we were going to sell and who we were going to keep.
Yeah. So, Shiona, I was talking to you just this morning before we started. You've been testing for a bit under 2 years, so your first crop of genomically tested animals are coming into the herd this spring, is that right? So it might be maybe a little bit too early to see a difference, or would you say that you just have a bit more confidence about those ones that are going to come in? Like, what are the benefits that you've seen, at this really early stage of your journey, or is it too early to tell?
It probably is too early to tell. We culled out from them. I think we've got about 160 of them that are going to calve this spring. Of that group, I think we read about 220, 230. So we just basically put a line down, and anything under that BPI we sold to China. And the only thing that I can say is that we preg tested them about a week and a half ago, and this is all hearsay, but it was one of our best preg test results of heifers to date. So whether that, and I was speaking to Michelle about it on the way down this morning, and so whether that's partly because it's just by chance, or she said the best way to go back is go back and look at the ones that we culled and look at what their fertility rating was, because we probably got 90, I think in the joining period there was 96 or 7% of them were pregnant. So which is much higher than normal. Normally we would get, down closer to the 90%. You'd get those empty animals that just didn't get pregnant. So are they the ones that we sold, or I don't know. So I'll go back and have a look at the ones we sold and see if we can see
the difference,
whether there's a fertility thing there, or so that's about the only thing I've got, because we haven't milked them yet.
Yeah, and just interestingly to pick up on that, do you reckon knowing that you've got the good ones, do you think that's changed the way you've managed those heifers, or not really?
No, not really. My nutrition background, I suppose, we just feed our cows, whether they're heifers or cows. So we've always tried to catch tail ender calves up. They're born 8 weeks later, they're going to be smaller. So I don't think it's changed how we manage them.
Yeah, okay, excellent. So I'm going to change tack slightly, and I am asking you this question. As I said, we've heard from John about all the good benefits of genomic testing. Shiona, I'm really curious, and I want to ask on behalf of all the service providers in the room, what's been the most difficult part about your genomic testing journey? And is there anything that you think could have made it easier, or things that you'd like to kind of give other farmers tips or tricks about how they could potentially navigate that a bit better than perhaps you guys have?
To start with, when we first did it, the actual taking the samples, the calves were standing up and running around, so that was a bit tricky. But now I do it when I dehorn, so the calves are under general anaesthetic on the ground, so I just walk along and they get their vaccination, and I do the notch at the same time, and it's really easy and it's a lot calmer. So that's been something that I think is, if you dehorn your calves under anaesthetic, that's a great time to do it. Probably the bit that I still struggle with the most, and that it's been a real trial, and is just once you get the data, navigating it and trying to work out what that table is telling you. So I sat down with Michelle, and she's taken me through a fair bit of the data vat, and I've had plays with that myself, but I have just recently got onto the Zoetis, and that's a bit clearer. You can actually set more parameters on that, so that's my next hurdle, is just to go through that and just tighten up selection criterias and play with that side as well. But just navigating the data, especially for someone who was never really into genetics that much. So whether it's probably the people that actually know about it that are in this room helping the farmer to understand that data is key.
Yeah, okay, and I think that's a really good point, and we sort of know that from herd testing. Lots of farmers were herd testing and then just not using the data well, and certainly we've been really mindful of that in our project too, Shiona. So I think that's really good advice, is just making sure that there's that customer service afterwards. And I think what I really like about this discussion with you is you're not a breeding enthusiast, you're not a genetics enthusiast, and I certainly wasn't either before I came into this project, but just having like the key things that you know in your mind are important traits for you and Caleb, and that's what you sort of want to focus on. Awesome. So in terms of these couple of crops of heifers that you have already genomically tested, so you talked about the ones that you decided to sell and export. Did the genomic testing results, have you used them at later stages? Like you said, you use a lot of sex semen and a bit of conventional semen. Were you using the genomic results in that decision making as well, or did they just blanket get sex? Like, how else have you used the data? Or
So probably moving on. So to start with, we've used the data obviously for BPI, who do we keep and who do we sell, because we sell them, they're buying them at a young age. So most of them have gone already. And from here on, probably our focus now is to fine tune more our breeding program. So like every now and then you'll see a bull, and I was speaking to Michelle again about this on the way down in the car, a bull that you really, really like. You like the look of everything, but his BPI doesn't seem to be as good as some of the other bulls, and you can't work out why. And, you know, if it is an issue, so Michelle was saying they're probably just got one little trait in BPI that's not so great. So ideally what we'll do is then, if we really like that bull, we'll put him over a cow that's really high in that trait, so that then we can use it in our breeding decisions. And then if we have got cows in the herd, because eventually over time we'll end up having the genomic data for the herd once the heifers all start coming in, and we have toyed with the idea of, instead of actually using conventional semen, just using beef over those cows. We've run a small beef herd as well, so we can do that and have yellow mothers, steers, whatever. So rather than the Frisian bull calves that at the moment are worth a bit of money but not as a general rule. So because that's our end game, is to rear every calf and not have anything that sells at 5 days old.
Yeah, that'll make Sarah smiling down there, I can see. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So probably I'm really mindful, Shiona, I'd love the opportunity for the audience to ask you some questions. So I've got one final question for you. My question, Shiona, is in terms of other farmers, you know, we're talking about the kind of the value of this technology to kind of help with decision making and fine tune what you're doing. For other farmers that aren't genetic enthusiasts, would you recommend genomic testing to them? And if so, are there any caveats that you'd put around it? What would be your advice to them if I was to say, Shiona, you know, I've got my 500 cows in Nambrock, I'm thinking about it, you know, what do you reckon? What would you say?
At the moment, look, I'd probably say, yeah, I've really enjoyed getting the data and actually understanding it, especially if you're selling animals, young stock. The stab that we were having previously is crazy. Like, you know, I said that we were cutting tail enders off. Well, I look at our genomic testing data, and the tail ending heifers are not our poorest BPIs. Actually, we've got the boar BPIs spread all the way through. So that, if you're selling young stock, I think, yeah, massive gains to be made there. And just from that point on, even just knowing who the sires are of your animals, like I know that we were getting them wrong, and already I get the data back, and then I get the email that says these are all of the misidentified animals and these are actually who their sires are. So if, you know, even if you're not that into genetics but you want an improvement, it will give you the data to actually then pinpoint a straw into a cow and give more help. It's been much more helpful for me as a non-genetic person, if you like, if you want to call me that, to have that data to then decide what bull I'm going to use than what we were doing before, even in our breeding, because we weren't really into it. So we were just picking bulls based on fertility, stature and type, really. And now we can actually move it a bit faster.
Yeah, and I've heard you mention a couple of times, obviously you're part of Michelle's project, but it does sound like you do rely heavily on someone trusted, a trusted advisor that can kind of help guide you and answer those questions, and I think that's all of our role in the room here, is really to be able to be knowledgeable and to be able to support farmers like yourself, Shiona, to really reap the value. So JP, that's it from me. So we've got 5 minutes left. So I'm going to throw it out to the audience to see if anyone's got any questions for Shiona. I can't see any questions on the screen either. I don't know whether, if anyone that's listening online's got questions, you can pop it in via Slido. You've blown them away, Shiona.
Look out.
Yeah, thanks, Pete.
Just on your breeding philosophy, so it was interesting that you actually set your own criteria, and that was through the fact that the cows you were having weren't suiting what you were wanting to do with them. So it could be your shed or your hills or whatever, but you actually could dial that up and breed the cow that suited you.
Yeah, no, well, we worked out from the time we started there Caleb and I started out there in 2003, and from then till about the 2011-12 mark, the cows grew, they got bigger. We used to milk in the herringbone, and I used to be able to sort of just step out and tap the 20 seconds cows, lean over and tap her nose. I walked through the rotary once we built that, and I couldn't see. I know I'm not that tall, but I couldn't see over their backs, some of them, and I thought, this is just ridiculous. They're too big. And then we'd get those cows. They were the ones that developed the sore feet going up and down hills. The furthest distance, the cows walk to the furthest paddocks, probably 3 k's. So they do that, and they just fall over, and those big cows just don't get up. They don't want to. And then they were the ones not getting pregnant. Yep.
Awesome. Anyone else have any questions? No? Awesome. Thanks, Shiona. I reckon, you're so sort of articulate in the way that you are able to describe sort of your journey and the challenges that you've had. And what makes me really happy is also, I'm becoming more of a genetics enthusiast, but also as an equal non-genetics enthusiast, is that it actually can be pretty simple with the right support, and once you sort of understand what you're getting. So Matt and I were talking at lunch around making complex things simple and usable. And yeah, I think you've really demonstrated how that can be done with a pretty cutting edge technology like Genomic. So Thanks so much for your time, Shiona.
No worries.
Thanks, JP.